Hello, hello, hello. Today I'll be talking about Evans Gambit, which is reached out of the Gyoko piano opening, which goes something like this. E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Bishop C4, Bishop C5. This is called Gyoko piano, which is Italian for quiet game. And when you're playing this, there are three systems that require consideration, namely Evans Gambit, Gyoko Pianorismo, and the Muller attack. Today I'll be covering the gambit which starts b4. Now, before you go jumping... Oh, wait a minute. It's not funny. Anyway, widely regarded as being created by the Welsh captain William Evans, whom after serving in the Navy went on to the sailing packet, which was the naval service tasked with the transportation of mail between British colonies. Well, anyway, the idea behind the Evans Gambit is to lure the bishop to a square it will have to later vacate when white pushes the pawn on c2 to c3. Well, as the saying goes, the best way to refute a gambit is to accept it. So after black plays bishop takes b4, he is up a pawn he can later give back to pacify some of white's initiative. Another option for black is to play the bishop back to b6. After a4, this doesn't look so good, because after the possible continuation of a6, knight c3, knight f6, and knight e5, whilst leading to a theoretically balanced position, it gives white some easy play, and black also has some problems to sort out. Going back to the main line of the bishop taking on b4, we will then see white's plan of c3, kicking the bishop. Bishop a5 was recommended by Emanuel Lasker during his London lectures in 1895. The bishop maintains holding some vital squares on white side of the board, as well as potentially pinning the c3 pawn to the king after the inevitable move of d4. Other moves that are playable include bishop e7, and after d4, knight a5. This is an example of another very solid way of playing against Evans Gambit, where white could respond by recapturing the pawn that black is handing back with knight takes e5. And after the knight takes the bishop on c4, the knight recaptures, and the position is once again equal, with a possible continuation of d5, e times d5, queen times d5, knight e3, and queen dropping back to d7. This position is fully playable for both sides, and it is equal. Notice that if we go back a few steps, notice that if black tries to dislodge the knight from the defence of the bishop with a move such as d6, this is a huge mistake, as the pawn on f7 is only defended by the king, and is attacked twice by both the bishop and the knight. So the simple move, knight takes f7, queen vacating her square to the only one available, queen d7, and after a possible continuation of queen h5, g6, and the queen picking up the undefended knight on a5, white is clearly winning in this position. Okay, so if we take it from the top again, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, the Evans Gambit move, b4, bishop takes on b4, c3, and bishop e7. After d4, knight a5, white doesn't have to take the material back off black. Instead, he could play the move bishop e2, which is a way of maintaining the tension. And after e times d4, queen times d4, knight c6, and the queen picking up the pawn on g7, black can move his bishop to f6, chasing the queen to g3, and after d6, the position is very complicated, and will give a very complicated game. Positionally, for the time being, it is very unclear. Going back to when white pushes the c-pawn, black could also move his bishop to d6. This is an old idea of the very strong American chess player Harry Pillsbury. It has more recently been played by Grishchuk, because after d4, you'll notice that black's e-pawn is no longer a concern. It is attacked twice, defended twice, so there's no threat against it for the time being. So black can continue to develop normally. After knight f6, castling again, rook e1, and h6. Black aims for moves such as rook e8 and bishop f8, where white would have no advantage. Okay, so back to the main line. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, b4, bishop takes b4, c3, and bishop a5. Remember the idea recommended by Lasker? White's subsequent move is d4. After all, there is no purpose in just moving c3 without pushing your d-pawn too. There are a few lines you'll see from here. You might see black move his pawn to d6, and after castling this and bishop b6, this is known as the Lasker defense, where white can regain his pawn or prevent castling with d takes e5, d takes e5, and queen takes d8 check, where black can either recapture with the knight or the king. If he recaptures with the knight, he'll drop his e-pawn, and if he recaptures with the king, he loses his castling rights. However, working for black's favour is that he's successfully nullified all of white's initiative. Instead of castling after the move d6, in this position, white has the option of moving queen b3. This is an aggressive move, lining up on the f7 pawn, but not unmanageable for black. If black doesn't know what he's doing, he can fall into traps such as bishop e6 and the fork d5, or a move such as queen f6, d5, knight c e7, and queen a4 check, picking up the bishop after the pawn blocks on c6. What black should do after the queen moves to b3 is take on d4, exploiting the fact that white is still uncastled and there's a pin on the c3 pawn. Instead of moving to this d6, by far black's most popular response is the pawn on e taking the pawn on d4. After white castles, there are now a few more responses black can make. One such response is d times c3. This is quite playable, but after queen b3, a line could follow such as queen f6, e5, queen g6, knight takes c3, knight g e7, and bishop a3. As you can see, white's bishops are wonderfully placed. They're strong control over the centre. It is ample compensation for the 2 pawns he has given up. A line after castling, such as bishop takes c3, knight takes c3, and d takes c3, is not ideal for black, as white will be able to use his dark squared bishop to dominate the open board throughout the rest of the game. Perhaps the best move after castling is knight g e7. This is the idea endorsed by both Nimzovich and Lasker, and is by part to blame for the lack of play Evans Gambit receives at the top level of chess nowadays, where black is preparing a counterattack in the centre of the board and ignoring grabbing extra pawns. A game might continue c takes d4, d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop a3, and bishop e6, giving both sides opportunities in the middle game. So, just to review the main line of Evans Gambit, it starts off e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, the gambiting move b4, the accepting of the gambit, bishop takes b4, c3, chasing the bishop, bishop a5, keeping on that diagonal, d4, e takes d4, castling now, knight g to e7, and the game may continue. C takes d4, d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop a3, and bishop e6. I hope this has given you a good feel for Evans Gambit. Have fun playing it, and goodbye.